The IDF has made final plans for taking control of Gaza City, and preliminary operations are already underway. This includes beginning the evacuations of civilians from the city, which has an estimated population of around 800,000 people. And at the same time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel issued a statement over the weekend ruling out any partial deals, but Israel will only agree to a deal that will see all the hostages released in one phase. And in a related story, numbers have been released showing that the amount of humanitarian aid that is being sent into the Gaza Strip is greater than the amount needed to supply the entire population of Gaza, and Israel is not responsible for the fact that little of what gets sent into the Gaza Strip is actually making it to the general population. And meanwhile, President Donald Trump has suspended the issuance of visitor visas to the United States for Gaza residents. In the northern arena, there is great tensions in Lebanon as the IDF pounds Hezbollah targets in the south, and the internationally recognized government threatens to send the organization's Secretary General to prison. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, and together with me is Shoshani, and we're bringing you all the truth about what's happening in Israel. So the IDF is already operating on the outskirts of Gaza City and building tent cities for the residents of Gaza who will begin to evacuate in the near future. The Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, is due to present the final plans for taking control of the area to the Defense Minister Israel Katz on Sunday. Tents will be brought into the Gaza Strip for the establishment of additional tent cities as preparations for the operation in Gaza following a weekend in which IDF forces continue to strike with force in the south and the eastern part of Gaza City as part of the softening up positions of Hamas defense ahead of the main offensive. And at the same time, Prime Minister Netanyahu has set a clear condition for a ceasefire, the release of all the hostages in one phase only. And elsewhere, 104 aid organizations claim that Israel is preventing them from operating in the Gaza Strip, but an examination reveals that only 20 of them requested approval, and so their obvious goal is to simply make Israel look bad and degrade our public image. And in a related story, the United Nations is admitting that an enormous amount of food is entering Gaza, but most of it is looted along the way, and only just a little bit reaches the destination, which is the Palestinian people. And speaking of aid organizations, the spokesperson of the Gaza Aid Fund, Safin Define, accused the NGO Doctors Without Borders, whose activists operate parts of the Netzer Hospital in Khan Yunis, that they did not admit to treatment of local employees of the fund after they were wounded in a Hamas ambush, saying they were not approved to enter. They were left to die outside the entrance. With all of this going on the ground level, we need some analysis of the big picture, and that's why TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Shoshani will take us to the last-minute negotiations currently being conducted with Hamas to try and avoid this military escalation in the Gaza Strip. Did Hamas yield to pressure from Egypt? What is clear is that again the ceasefire proposal is on the table, while it seems that on the other side, the United States is offering the Witkoff Outline 3.0, and we will bring you all the new details that are on the new American proposal for a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. A draft American proposal was prepared following the talks that took place this week in Egypt between a Hamas delegation and the mediators, according to the American and the Arab sources. The proposed outline will begin with the familiar Witkoff outline and end with a long-term ceasefire agreement between the two sides. With that in mind, why did the United States State Department announce today that it is suspending all visas issued to Gazans following reports of misuse? Mati will give us all the details. And speaking of details, Hezbollah is intensifying a propaganda campaign with emotional videos to recruit support against the government's decision to disarm it, while senior political figures attack Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem, and many analysts are warning of the serious danger of civil war in Lebanon. And further afield, the peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia will enable the application of additional economic pressure on a sinking Iran, while Israel's signing of a gas export deal to Egypt will weaken Cairo's motivation to view Israel as an adversary. Is this the beginning of Israel's ability to reshape the Middle East according to its will? We will take a closer look. Guys, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in Israel on day 681 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region who are taking their orders from the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. 1 second before we start, I want to invite you to click that subscribe button. You want to know why? Because together we need to help this video reach more people so that people around the world will understand what is happening with Israel and know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. There are many lies that are being circulated, and we need to share the truth. So guys, forces of Division 99 were the ones that began operating in the Zaytun area of Gaza City over the weekend, and fighters of the Nahal Brigade and the 7th Brigade encountered IED sites, eliminated terrorists, and destroyed military infrastructures above and below the ground. As part of their activities, the forces struck and destroyed a booby trap building in which weapons were stored. And during the activity, terrorists fired an anti-tank missile at the forces, but they did not succeed in harming our troops. In a rapid closure of the loop, the forces located and eliminated the terrorists, and the Air Force operated in cooperation with the maneuvering forces and struck military targets and terrorists in the area. And next week, the IDF is expected to begin evacuating the population from Gaza City, where according to the estimates, more than 800,000 people are located. As part of the preparations for the renewed maneuver, the IDF has pulled forces out of the Gaza Strip for refreshment and for training, while in parallel, steps are being taken to reduce as much as possible the call-up of reserve brigades. However, the final plans and the method of operation will determine the scope of the forces that will take part in the conquest of Gaza City. Speaking of which, over the weekend it was reported that the IDF is working to shorten the timelines of the conquest of Gaza City in accordance with the directives of the political echelon. Initially, it was estimated that the encirclement of Gaza City would be completed within 2 months, in the month of October, but now it is a shorter period, most likely just a few weeks. This means that the IDF is preparing to begin the conquest of Gaza already next month if there is no progress on the issue of the hostages. The IDF wants to move up the timelines, both to shorten the war and to increase the pressure in order to bring a turning point on the issue of the hostages who are in life-threatening danger. In the diplomatic arena, according to Arab reports, Hamas conveyed messages to the mediators of a willingness to discuss a parallel deal, but emphasized that the return of all the hostages would be carried out only within a framework of an agreement that would bring an end to the war and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Conversely, the Prime Minister's office clarified this evening that Israel will agree to a deal only on condition that all the hostages are released at once, and that the agreement will include the dismantling of Hamas of its weapons, the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, Israeli control over the security envelope, and the establishment of a new governing entity that is neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. And meanwhile, Hamas is accusing Israel of continued strikes on neighborhoods in Gaza City, saying that the operation to conquer the city has in fact already begun. Amidst all of this, 8 organizations, as they call themselves, are not giving up on the narrative that Israel is engaging in a deliberate campaign to starve the Gazan population. Together with the genocide campaign, they have succeeded in degrading Israel's public image in many countries around the world to a historic new low. How much are these campaigns based on blatant lies that the international media embrace them without checking? Let me know what you think. But probably a lot of it is based on this, and I can give you a concrete example. Last Thursday, 104 organizations published a joint call claiming that Israel prevents them from delivering aid and presents preconditions that include excessive demands. However, of the 104 organizations that signed the statement, 84 never even asked Israel to try and send aid into the Gaza Strip. Only 20 organizations on this list even submitted the request. Of those, 3 were denied, 1 was approved, and the rest are still under review. In practice, dozens of other organizations operate inside Gaza in coordination with Israel because they met the requirements. This is just one example of many where the truth is ignored or manipulated to serve an anti-Israel agenda, and many of the organizations that signed the statement are small outfits that specialize in bashing Israel at every opportunity that they have. And furthermore, already now, the volume of food entering the Gaza Strip is well above the threshold set by the international standard to feed the number of people who need assistance. Beyond that, it is not as if the demands that Israel presented to the organizations came out of nowhere. It is already well known that Hamas terrorists fill the ranks of UNRWA, the United Nations organizations to help the Palestinians. And so Israel must be very careful when it comes to allowing anything to go into the Gaza Strip under the supervision. But another example is Doctors Without Borders, another NGO, which was one of the organizations which signed on the anti-Israel statement. One of the organization's employees was Fadi El-Wadiyah, who worked in a capacity of a therapist, except that he was also a member of the terrorist organization, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and was active in the rocket array against Israel. Israel should not be expected to approve the activity of bodies that provide cover for operatives for terrorist organizations. Furthermore, the World Central Kitchen, this is an organization that is not a signatory to the call, and it is one of the most active bodies in areas under Hamas control. It employs hundreds of workers, and in April of 2024, 7 of the organization's employees lost their lives in a tragic incident. The IDF conducted an inquiry and acknowledged that it was an operational failure, but perhaps understandable because 62 employees of this organization were also members of the Hamas terrorist organization, and accidents can happen in the confused circumstances that this created inside Gaza. In any case, cooperation with the organization was renewed, and Israel demanded that the 62 Hamas members will be fired. This is the reason that Israel demands transparency. The bodies whose request for activity was denied refused to present lists of employees. What if their employees include Hamas operatives and their presence in these areas would put IDF soldiers at risk? Beyond that, why should Israel grant approval of activity to bodies that deny its very right to exist? Is it unreasonable for Israel to demand that organizations which say that they want to help in this situation not employ enemy combatants with unapologetically promoting anti-Semitic ideology and attitudes while presenting themselves as neutral humanitarian aid organizations, but actually employ Hamas terrorists. Guys, let me know what you think about all of this in the comments. What should Israel do in this situation? And now we are turning to a related topic, a comprehensive study that is conducted by 8 researchers in the field that has examined the quantities and the composition of the food that actually reached the Gaza Strip during 4 months in 2024. According to the study, the average supply over 4 months was 3,163 calories per person per day. This figure significantly exceeds the expected standard of 2,100 calories per person. The study's conclusions said that the amount of food crossing the borders into the Gaza Strip exceeded the minimum per capita requirements for humanitarian aid. Now, with this being the case, we might ask the question about why there is still hunger in the Gaza Strip if there is so much supply. Well, precisely as the United Nations admitted, the shortage arises due to the fact that the humanitarian aid is looted, and the leading looter is Hamas. The entire population is under Hamas rule and control, not under the Israeli rule. If Hamas wanted it to, the food would reach every point in Gaza. But Hamas does not want that. It would rather accuse Israel of starving the Gazan population. International and other media reports and outlets all over the world should check the facts before they issue titles and stories about Israel starving the Gazans. This is not how one helps the residents of the Gaza Strip, but rather, this is how you help a terrorist called Hamas. Speaking of which, a spokesperson for the American Aid Fund, GHF, former soldier Tzfin Dafain, said in a recent interview that doctors from the organization's Doctors Without Borders are operating at the Nessa hospital in Khan Yunis, and they refuse to treat 20 activists of the GHF fund who were wounded in various incidents as a result of Hamas terrorist ambushes. Tzfin said, "You may not know this because it was not reported publicly, but at the Nessa hospital, a bus filled of our local workers, many of whom sleep and live at our site because of the threat from Hamas terrorists, was attacked. 9 of the workers were murdered, and 20 survivors were taken to the Nessa hospital where doctors from Doctors Without Borders work, but our workers were refused admission for treatment. They were not approved to enter. They were left to die outside of the entrance to the hospital." The Humanitarian Aid Fund and its workers have been subjected to several attacks by Hamas, with this being the deadliest. Besides that, the fund is subject to a smear campaign by many other NGOs around the world, including Doctors Without Borders and the United Nations as well. In practice, according to the fund, more than 123 million meals have been distributed directly to the Gazan people so far. And guys, I want to call on you to help us spread the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, I want to talk to you for a moment about a way that you can directly assist Israel as we try to recover from the effects of all these rounds of conflicts and wars that are waged against us. So after the war with Iran, life here in Israel hasn't just been about the physical recovery. It's about people trying to rebuild from the ground up. So many hard-working Israelis, including bakers, artisans, small shop owners, and others, had their lives turned upside down. Some were called to reserve duty. Others had to leave their homes. Many lost months of income almost overnight. Now, they are trying to start again by reopening their businesses, restocking shelves, and get back to doing what they love. But it's not easy. They need help, and that's why Arza exists. Arza partners directly with these small businesses, buying their handmade goods and delivering them in beautiful boxes to homes around the world. Each box helps real families get back on their feet. It puts money in the hands of those working hard to recover with dignity, not charity. So if you want to be part of this effort, go to www.artzabox.com/TBNIL and use the code TBNIL to get a 10% off your subscription. Again, that's www.artzabox.com/TBNIL. One box, one family, one step closer to rebuilding. And now, we'll move to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, who will take us through the details of the mediator's proposal between Israel and the terrorist organization Hamas, including the Witkoff Framework 3.0, and tell us the details on the new American proposal for a hostage deal. So, over to you, Mati.
Thank you, Yair. Indeed, it's been weeks of stalemate when it comes to negotiations between Israel, the Hamas, and of course the Americans that are behind the deal. And it seems like we're on the brink of a breakthrough. Now, let me give you some of the details of what's been happening. This weekend has been full of an extreme effort to really jumpstart this negotiation. And it's happening on multiple fronts. It took place in boardrooms, in meetings in Cairo. It took place in intense meetings between intelligence organizations in Doha, Qatar, through this weekend. And it takes place in the new outline presented by Steve Witkoff, the emissary to the Middle East, by the US government that is trying to bring once more a substantial change. And a couple things have changed over this weekend that might be a sign of something dramatic changing on the Hamas side and the Israel side. Let's outline them in the next couple minutes and really break down everything that's been happening here. So first of all, let's remind you all how we've got here. Well, it's been months at this point of attempted negotiations between the Israelis, the Hamas, bartered or organized by the Americans, by multiple other countries, including the Turks and the Russians at a certain time, and the Egyptians and the Qataris. Everyone is trying to really end this conflict. And the goal is very clear to everyone, possibly not including the Hamas. The goal is ending the conflict once and for all in the Gaza Strip and exchanging or releasing all Israeli hostages, both dead and alive, from the Gaza Strip. Let me tell you something. If you thought or had in your mind that this topic was sort of something we're going to move on from, I want to let you know that this is a hot topic in Israel. Even today, as I'm recording this, there are demonstrations throughout this country calling on the government to quickly, swiftly, effectively, aggressively, whatever the verb is, bring home the hostages. So this is something that is way high on the Israeli priority list across the public and throughout the government. So back to our topic. Israel has been working very hard to try and reach an agreement with Hamas. And Hamas, every time we try to engage in these agreements, goes through the same motions. They say the following: yes, we'd love to, but, and then the but is more substantial than the entirety of the whole agreement. But we want you to promise never to start animosity or acts of attack against the Hamas government in Gaza for years to come. Every time we've tried to enter a negotiation up till now with Hamas, Hamas have been the ones backing out of this agreement. And it seems like things are now changing for the first time in a long time. And this is, at times, this is a rumor. At times, this is information that's being leaked from behind closed doors. And sometimes what I'm about to tell you is information that's open to the public. Let's start with the secretive information. One of the biggest challenges in the negotiations so far has been the question of a partial or full deal. Let me explain that. Israel wants a full deal. What does that mean? We want all the hostages, living and dead, at once. Why do we want that? Because we have very little trust in Hamas, understandably so, and we desire to end the, let's call it the negotiation phase, in one fell swoop, at the end of which Israel has all the hostages back and we disengage from the Gaza Strip to a certain degree that's negotiable. Hamas ceases animosity or attacks against Israel, and we move on with our lives. That's the Israeli agenda. The Hamas has continuously and systematically tried to push for something entirely different, which is a staggered method. We give you a little now, you cease attacks against Hamas. We give you a little more later, and so on and so forth. At the end of every one of these phases, Israel and Hamas, by the way, know that we don't fully do an exchange of hostages. And for the Israeli government, this is a no-go. I want to be clear with you. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for months now, has said there will be no partial deal. In fact, the head of the Mossad, who spent the last weekend in Doha, Qatar, negotiating this exact issue, has said something along those lines, but with a couple caveats that might really be able to change the picture. He said Israel's only willing to do a full deal. But there's an asterisk at the end of that line that says that that possible full deal might be a staggered full deal. So maybe X amount of people today, and in 30 days, the rest of those people. So a one big package of a deal, but that's sort of spread out over a period of time. Again, this goes to a certain degree against the public statements of the Israeli government, but I think everyone is at the point now where we understand that time is running out, and we might have to sort of soften some of our talking points to be able to really reach an agreement. This gets even more specific. There's a lot of pressure on Hamas to really bring an end to this conflict. It starts in the White House, through Witkoff, through President Trump, that have said very strongly, we want this conflict to end in the Gaza Strip in weeks, max in a matter of months. And I want to explain why there's a sense of urgency. There's a couple factors playing into this. One is the desire to end the, let's call it the active warfare. What does that mean? To end the fighting between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip and allow a more long-term humanitarian solution to be phased in over there. But there's another element here, which is that the ongoing humanitarian crisis taking place in the Gaza Strip. Yes, there is obviously a humanitarian crisis after almost 2 years of warfare in the Gaza Strip. There's a lot of international pressure on Israel by multiple countries that are saying it is now time to end this. Now, they understand we don't live in a vacuum. They want to help us reach an agreement where Hamas ceases hostilities against Israel, Israel can withdraw from the Gaza Strip, and very importantly to Israel, we get every last hostage back. So here's what you need to be watching out for. Hamas have started shifting their talking points on the topic of the negotiation. Finally, we're able to actually talk about a full exchange of the hostages, and it seems like they're inching towards accepting that as part of the agreement. And another really big piece, an important piece in this whole thing, is the question of what happens to those who are left behind. Let me explain. Even if it's an almost immediate exchange deal, and Israel, let's say, gets 50% of the hostages today, and in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we get the rest. Up till now, Hamas have been completely denying access to the hostages, be it the International Red Cross or other aid organizations. And that is a huge issue for Israel that we want to solve. A solution to that might be in the ceasefire agreement that is being promoted. Another really big piece is the question of what happens the day after. Hamas, up till now, refused, at least publicly, to accept the fact that one day they might not be the lords of the Gaza Strip. Now, in this phase of the negotiation, suddenly we're talking about a partial removal of Hamas and what happens on the day after. So all these pieces are coming together. You have an international crisis that is pressing on Israel to end the conflict quickly. There's a huge amount of public pressure, both internationally and locally, to extract the hostages as fast and as effectively as could possibly be. And there's a loss of patience and interest on a global stage in really seeing this forever war drawing out yet for another phase. And I need to remind you all, what we're looking at here is an important piece in a global puzzle. The Gaza Strip mirrors or is the microcosm of a greater agreement that will include the Saudis, in possible next phase of the Abraham Accords, will include possibly a greater agreement that might loop in also the Iranians and the next phase of them dismantling their nuclear program, which is a whole other conversation. So there's a lot going on here that sort of hinges on the ability to end the Gaza conflict. And for the Israeli public and the Israeli government, the facts are very simple. If we're not able to release the hostages, there is no go. In fact, the Israeli army has already sent out the recruitment orders to over 100,000 soldiers that are supposed to be called back in almost immediately to fully take over the Gaza Strip. Because we've been tired and we've seen enough of what Hamas brings to the negotiation table. So the Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, clearly states, we will fully take over the Gaza Strip, every last inch of it, unless we get the hostages back. We really can't move on before this phase is over. Keep your eyes open because this is going to be moving fast. There is, and I don't say this lightly, there's an incredible amount of pressure on Israel, on Hamas, on the US government to really wrap up the situation as fast as possible because time is running out for the hostages and the world is losing patience with what's been going on in the Gaza Strip. Simply because a war drawn out for this long always brings a substantial cost to the civilian population. And I want to say one more thing here. Part of the international pressure on Israel, and this is a whole topic that we could talk about for hours, is the fact that aid organizations are actively preventing aid from being distributed to the people in Gaza. If you're not aware of this, we've done quite a lot of content on this topic on the channel. But just to give you in a nutshell, the situation here is that part of the pressure by international organizations on Israel to end the conflict in Gaza is the fact that they're actively denying helping the Palestinian population by not distributing the goods in there. So yes, UN organizations and others, and of course Hamas that's been doing this since the beginning of the war, they are actively trying to prevent Israel from distributing aid into the Gaza Strip because that humanitarian crisis that's created, the images of people fighting over food, that serves their anti-Israeli agenda. In other words, there's a lot of pressure going on. It's diplomatic, it's in the PR arena, it's in the lives of the hostages that are dying away in Hamas captivity. The US is putting all their weight into this topic, as are the Qataris, as are the Egyptians now, and of course the Israeli government, who's already called on the reservists to come back and finish the full military takeover of the Gaza Strip unless we get the hostages back. Now back to Yair Pinto.
Thank you very much, Mati Shoshani, for bringing order to this very complicated issue. And guys, I want to thank you for your support of Boots on the Ground. And I also want to invite you to take that support to the next level by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and of course, do not forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we will move to news from the northern arena, including IDF strikes on Hezbollah field operatives over the weekend, and an escalation and an offensive against them by the National Army of Lebanon and the internationally recognized government of the State of Lebanon. On Friday, the IDF spokesperson issued a statement saying that the IDF struck a short time ago using Air Force fighter jets, a military infrastructure, and an underground infrastructure as well at the site of the terrorist organization Hezbollah, where military activity was identified in the area of Beaufort Ridge in the southern parts of Lebanon. The existence of the site and the activity there constitute a violation of the understandings between Israel and Lebanon. The IDF will continue to act in order to remove any threat to the State of Israel. And meanwhile, political tension in Lebanon has escalated in recent days after Hezbollah Secretary General Sheikh Naim Qassem warned that the government's decision to dismantle the organization's weapons and concentrate them in the hands of the state could lead to a civil war and internal conflict. He accused the government of Nawaf Salam of handing Lebanon over to Israel and of implementing American and Israeli decisions, and declared that the organization will not relinquish its weapons as long as Israel attacks continues. The remarks sparked sharp condemnations from a series of political figures, including Justice Minister Adel Nassar, who wrote that the threat to destroy Lebanon in order to defend the weapons nullifies the claim that the weapons are intended indeed to defend Lebanon. Guys, I must take a moment to make a personal comment here. Justice Minister Nasser has made an incredibly good point. If Hezbollah is so concerned about defending Lebanon, why is it also threatening to destroy Lebanon and threatening a civil war? This ridiculous situation has been ongoing for decades, and no one has ever called Hezbollah out on its blatant hypocrisy. I'm glad to see someone is finally stepping up and pointing this out. Also, the Lebanese forces and the party that accused Hezbollah of striving for a confrontation with the army and the state of Lebanon, while political Fares Said claimed that this is intimidation stemming from a defensive posture of this terrorist organization. Some of the criticism also took on a practical character, as Member of Parliament Ashraf Rifi told the El Arabiya channel that he is preparing to file a legal suit against Qassem and warned of the danger of sliding into a civil war. In parallel, the Change movement demanded that the judicial system put Qassem on trial and warned that the absence of an official response could endanger public peace. Member of Parliament Nadim Gamiel called on the government to decide on the issue of illegal weapons as the only way to ensure security and stability in the country of Lebanon. However, alongside the political sparring, Hezbollah has in recent days been running an intensive video campaign on WhatsApp and on Telegram social media groups intended to stir emotions and mobilize public support against the government's decision. The videos combine footage of military operations in 1980s and the 1990s against Israeli outposts in southern Lebanon, alongside clips of speeches by the organization's former Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah from various periods in which he stressed that the importance of Hezbollah is vital in keeping control of its weapons. So according to the assessments in the local media, the wave of propaganda has succeeded in shifting the mood amongst part of the public in the south and rallying it to the organization's positions ahead of a possible internal political campaign. And guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in the northern arena. And as always, we invite you to be part of the team by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and subscribing to this YouTube channel. Remember that Israel is dealing with a war on the public diplomacy front. So we will continue to share the truth so that you will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, the Reuters news agency reported on Sunday morning that at least 2 explosions were heard in the Yemeni capital of Sana'a, near the power station. In Yemen, it was reported that this was an Israeli strike in the area of Khaziz power station in the south of the city. And according to the report, the CEO of the electricity corporation in Sana'a, Mashal El-Rafi, said that the power stations were subjected to an attack which caused a temporary power outage. Elsewhere, a source in Yemen's civil defense told the El Mashirach channel that is affiliated with the Houthi terrorist organization in Yemen that the strikes were directed at the Khaziz power station in the Shana area in the south of the Sana'a governorate. It was directed at the generators at the station, which caused its activities to stop, and our teams are working to extinguish the fire that resulted. As I have clarified before, the same law applies to Yemen as to Tehran. The Houthis will pay heavy prices for the missiles that are fired towards the state of Israel, and we will continue to act at any time and in any place to defend the state of Israel. This is according to the Israeli defense minister. So guys, keep spreading the truth, share and follow us, and most importantly, remember that this is a spiritual war. How do you fight a spiritual war? You pray. So when we pray, let's pray for God to give wisdom to our leaders, to your leaders, to the teams that are leading the negotiations to release the hostages from Hamas and end this war. Let's pray that the enemies of Israel will stop hating us and sending missiles at us, and will start loving the Jewish people and the people of Israel, and together we can create a better Middle East. God can make that happen. Let's pray for the IDF soldiers and their families that are now preparing to enter the Gaza Strip once again. It's very scary. Let's pray for all the innocent lives that are affected by this conflict, if it's the people of Yemen, the Gaza Strip, Judea and Samaria, Lebanon, and Syria. Yes, everybody, including the Israeli people. And let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem.